Hello, and welcome, and thank you for joining us for the Evolving Solutions Coffee Talk series session, Date Claude, Marry Bob. If you have any questions during the session today, please use the chat function in Teams. Now I will turn this over to Evolving Solutions Chief Technology Officer, Michael Downs.
Thanks, Kelly, and thank you everybody for joining today. I'm very excited about this session. I always am reluctant to bring up AI in every conversation that I have around technology because it's the thing that everybody wants to talk about. But in this case, we've actually got some great content where AI is solving a really interesting problem. So looking forward to discussing that today. I'm joined by Rael Rodening. She's the Principal Intelligent Operations Architect here at Evolving Solutions. Good morning, Rael.
Good morning, Michael.
So as always, we're talking about AI-assisted coding today. But before we talk about any of that, we have to talk about coffee for a minute. So today I'm drinking in my Evolving Solutions mug, which you'll all get the opportunity to get one of, as well as a Starbucks gift card, and we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the webinar. But I'm drinking a blend from Ann Arbor, Michigan by a company called Ruse Roast that does all their coffee through a solar powered roaster. And it is actually called Badass Women Blend. So it's a really nice dark blend. Get a little bit of, Pacific Island taste sort of coming through some of the beans there, which I like as part of a blend. Not really huge fan of it on its own, but as part of a blend, it's great. But Rael actually had been a barista in her past life, so she knows coffee better than any of us and is so dedicated to it that she actually roasts her own beans.
That is true. I do roast my own beans. I order them green in bulk and have them in storage. In fact, I'm due to roast another batch when I'm getting to the end of this week.
Awesome. So I always say that if you reach out to your account executive or somebody on our team and have a meeting or a demo after our webinar today, I'm very happy to send you a pound of the artisanal coffee of your choice. In this case, it'll probably be Ruse Roast. And if you get really lucky, you might get Rael to roast you a half a pound. So always something good reason. Even though the content is going to be worth reaching out for anyway, the coffee is another little bit of incentive. So, so I really wanted to dive into this topic. I'm very excited about it. As you know, the title of this webinar is Date Claude, Marry Bob, with a reference to Anthropic's Claude code, which is taking over the world, I think. They're using it for everything from coding to doing office work and all kinds of other things that it's taken over the agentic landscape a little bit. So it was really exciting for me when we started talking a little bit more, and Rael really brought to my attention Bob, which is an IBM solution that does a lot of what Claude does, but it does it in many ways in a much more stable and much more extensible enterprise environment. So we'll talk even more about that as we get further along. But before I go any further, I would be remiss if I didn't ask Rael to give a little bit of her background, maybe just introduce yourself a little bit more, a little bit of your background, and then maybe dive into sort of what got you into coding in the first place and some of that experience.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Most recently, I ran an enterprise automation platform at a very large utility. Prior to that, I've done a lot of different kinds of technical consulting. And I think probably most interesting is I was really lucky. My dad was a professor, and we were able to get one of the very first Apple IIe's, which probably tells you how old I am. And I had to skip school because I was so into writing Apple Basic. And so I got to write Apple Basic. And the first program I ever wrote was actually a 5 1/4 floppy disk that accompanied a textbook that my father wrote, and was a quiz program that had like a tree made out of letters on green screen.
Wow. So you were much more ambitious than me. I had access to a TRS-80 in my middle school, and I got into writing BASIC, but the main purpose for BASIC was saying print whatever the word was, and then go to the line for print, and it just looped on forever and filled up the buffer in the screen. That was sort of the extent of my programming experience when I was in middle school. So you were much more ambitious than I was. So good thing you're talking about this instead of me.
I have to admit, I've always loved it. I've dabbled ever since I can, even when I wasn't being a developer. So I've played with a lot of different tools over my career for writing code.
Okay, so one of the things we wanted to touch on today was writing code when we were writing in Apple Basic or any other kind of early coding language was pretty much a command line experience. And actually in college, and now I'm going to date myself really badly. I actually wrote term papers using VI and post-print processing on the VAX, so that I got really good at VI, but that command line interface, you could do things really quickly, but it definitely had its limitations. So obviously Word came along and made writing papers much easier, but then IDEs came along and made writing code much easier.
Yeah, IDEs have been great and they've been maturing over time. There are still some older ones like MobaTerm or some other things. Most recently, I would say over the last 5 years, I primarily used VS Code. I particularly love VS Code because it has the built-in terminal and you're able to switch from a very user-friendly GUI to do things like syncing up to your source control. But you can very quickly use SSH and log into a server and work in terminal if that's your preference. And so really that's been my go-to probably 6 years now.
Okay.
So been a favorite. And then I met Bob. So there's a little bit of a story behind Date Claude and Marry Bob. Is I came back from playing with Bob because we had a customer that wanted some information. So I needed to get pretty smart pretty fast. And I really liked it, but I still was kind of like, I don't know about this. And then I had the opportunity to go to a training session, all-day training session put on by the actual developer and the product owner of the Bob application. And I learned about Bob and came back and was talking to Michael and Kelly and some of the folks on the marketing team. And I made a joke that, I think I love Bob so much. I told my husband that he was going to have to just pack his bags and we were going to get divorced and I was marrying Bob. So I can't say take credit for Date Claude, Marry Bob, but I maybe spurred the idea a little bit because I kept joking about how much I loved Bob.
Well, so before we dive too deep into the IDE and what's there, I think everybody is probably very familiar with sort of the transformation that Claude Code and other kinds of generative AI has wreaked on the coding landscape. We've had autocomplete or other kinds of prompt-based IDEs for quite a while now. I want to say 15 years or more, where you could sort of get some idea of what your next piece of code might logically be. Claude Code and other generative code goes way, way past that. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what generative AI coding in general sort of brings to the table?
Well, both good and bad. So let's talk about what's really good and I'm going to start with Claude Code because I also had the opportunity to use Claude Code alongside VS Code and I liked it, but I wasn't in love with it. But in general, generative AI coding tools allow you to say in plain language what you would like to have developed, and then the generative agents will go out and bring back and actually write code for you. So for example, you could say, I want a web-based agent that will go search the web for a company and I want it to return to me the company history, the list all the executives and their core initiatives for the next 3 years. And something as simple as that, it will go out and it will generate a web-based application that you can use in a matter of minutes and actually functions fairly well. And so that's what generative AI code changes. So for me, I know several languages, but I've got to be honest, I'm not, off the top of my head, I can't tell you which Python function. I know it's there, that it does it, and it probably starts with a particular letter, but sometimes I've got to pull out a book and look it up and go, oh, that's right. Or same thing for C# or other languages. And so what it does is it's really helpful because if you know what it's supposed to do and you're familiar with a language, it'll write the code and then you can review the code, look at it and go, oh, whoa, you completely missed the boat. Or you can give it feedback and say, you're close. However, I know I'd prefer that you use this particular Python package instead because it's more secure. Or I'd prefer that you use this Python package because it's closer and more compatible with what you've got in your environment. And it'll go back and rewrite that code for you. And so, for example, I wrote something that here at Evolving Solutions for myself, similar to the sales agent I was describing. And it would have probably taken me 40 to 60 hours to write it and get it to a testable framework. I used agentic AI to write it in about 4 hours.
Wow.
Now, really incredible. That was an initial prompt, getting some feedback, looking at the code, having it adjust some things. And so I went back and forth. That wasn't all coding time, but it was interaction and review.
Yeah.
The time savings on that is huge to get to a testable prototype.
So that's a great example. And this is why everybody is so enamored with AI code, right? You talked about up to 60 hours of coding time condensed to 4 or maybe a little bit hour longer of interactive time. There's this whole separate idea about vibe coding, which is like I can just go out and ask whatever it is that I want and have it created magically for me. And we know, seen plenty of things in the news, both on security and other things that are problems with vibe coding. So from your perspective, what's the role of an expert or somebody who understands coding, who understands the output that you're trying to create in a world where you're having an agentic AI create the code for you?
Well, two things, and I think this gets to, I said we'll talk about the positives, which I did. Now we're going to kind of get to, I'm not going to call it a negative, but the risks and the caution is, I'm going to use Java, for example. I don't know Java coding at all, but if I decided that I wanted to vibe code a Java application, I could absolutely do that. I could put it in plain language, tell it I wanted to use Java, but because I'm not an expert in Java, I might look at that code and go, okay, great, and execute it and potentially even have my company execute it and load it into their production environment. But one, I don't know if it's any good. So I don't know if it's performant. I don't know if it's a resource hog. I don't know how it's securing anything. Like, so if it's going out and I'm asking it to get data, I have no idea what under the covers. Is it using my credentials? Maybe I didn't credential it properly. And so I potentially open organizations up. And even personally, if you do this on your own laptop, you potentially open yourself up to some pretty high risk situations where you're going to bring in a bad package. So the downside is with vibe coding, there's just a tremendous amount of risk. And I think if I can bring up a point, Michael, one of the things that concerns me about some of these vibe coding tools is it's very difficult to secure these. It's so, especially if you're in a corporate environment, the way that they get secured and whether or not the data sovereignty, meaning the data that you put into the chat, stays with your organization, or whether or not it goes to an external organization or goes to through the web, really introduces a lot of risk for organizations. So yeah, those are, I think, real challenges with some of the vibe coding that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's very alluring, right? As somebody who understands technology very well and has done a lot of lower level IT over my life, being able to create that kind of code and be able to go use it quickly is extremely appealing. And even when we talk to executives and other folks like that who aren't even in the technology space, they're like, well, I just want this report. I can just throw this together. This is easy. I can get a website. I can go do this for me. And you've called out a couple of really important considerations. One is around packages and the packages that a vibe coding agent might go and pull, and whether or not there are vulnerabilities or security issues in the packages. And then secondly, credentials. And whatever credentials it uses to interact with things is a huge risk. So those are just a couple of the security risks. So there are things that are happening in the marketplace right now to address those kinds of security risks around AI-based coding. But Bob takes a particular approach to sort of dealing with some of those. So let's transition a little bit to talking about IBM Bob, maybe at a very quick sort of explanation of what Bob actually is. It's not quite a perfect analogy for Claude, but it does much of the same thing, plus some other things. And then what Bob innovates on that maybe isn't out there already.
Sure. Bob mimics Claude, or where they are similar is where they're both agentic based, meaning you can use plain language to say, I want you to write something, and it will go ahead and write that code for you. I think one of the big differences that you've got is Bob has a methodology. I shouldn't say for us, we have an opinionated method on how you can implement corporate security into your repositories if you are leveraging IBM Bob.
Sure.
Code Claude just doesn't have that capacity. The other thing that I think is substantially different now, I realize Claude has now come out with, and I'm going to forget, it starts with an M. Anyway, it does security stuff. Bob has really innovated on in a couple of really interesting areas. One is it allows you to do things like ask, and allows incremental approvals or blanket approvals, but it also allows you a very clear path for securing your environment. And by design, your data, in other words, the chat data that you put in saying, I want to develop X. And so in particular, if I'm developing it for a client, I can talk about that client, and that data is sovereign to ESI or any organization. It does not go back out to the large language model. That data stays internal.
And so, for example, when you're putting that prompt in to say, build me an application that references my top 5 clients that are over here in this database, and gives me insight into what investment strategy they may be taking over the next quarter based off of some external data source or whatever else, you're asking this and the agent to go build this for you. If I'm using Bob, that request that maybe even articulates who my top 3 clients are stays inside of my 4 walls and doesn't end up in somebody else's large language model.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a highly misunderstood challenge with any generative AI is the things you're putting in there are, first of all, you're training the model, which may benefit your competitors or may benefit somebody else in your ecosystem, but it also potentially exposes things that otherwise you may not want to have available out on the open web beyond just the security issues. Just by virtue of the prompt being there, there are things that could be inferred.
Yep.
So what do you, as you started using Bob, what were the first couple things that stood out to you besides the securing it and being able to sort of reinforce some of those coding standards? What were the couple things that really struck you as this being, why did you decide to marry Bob instead of continuing on with
the quality of the code is absolutely phenomenal. Okay. No, I have to put a caveat around that. I can't speak to Java because I don't know Java, but sure. I know Python, I know C#, I know C++, I know a little bit of .NET, I know YAML really well, I know regex, I know JSON, and right. Everything that I've played with, the quality of the code is very, very good. So that was the first thing that stood out. I was just floored. And efficiency. It's very efficient at writing code. So I really personally appreciate that. You know, brevity to me is critical when you're writing code, and clarity. The other thing that really stood out, there are kind of 2 things that I really appreciated. One is you can ask it to provide you an architecture diagram, and it will do that for you. And it isn't always really pretty. Sometimes it's very pretty. Sometimes it does actually beautiful flow diagrams. Frequently, though, it provides you a mermaid diagram with, you know, the vertical dashes and other things, but it's still very, very readable. And you can include that in your repository so it's available for reference to other people, which I think is just hugely valuable. As I was working previously, having that context and that history for somebody who came behind me sure. Was just immensely, immensely valuable. So those are probably the 2 things. Probably the third thing that I really loved I can actually ask it to run a security vulnerability analysis against my code base.
Sure.
I guess I'm going to give you 4 things. And it gives you CVE scores and links, and it'll give you, I'm not saying it's perfect, but it really gives you a good idea of where you're at.
Sure.
The 4th thing that I really, really liked about Claude Code, and I lost my train of thought, I apologize, I'm sure it'll come up later, but if that's not enough, I, as a developer, oh, I know what, Claude Code is actually based on a fork of VS Code. So if you love and know VS Code, everything that you have
Claude
already
Code
is,
or Bob is based off of a fork.
no, sorry, IBM Bob is a fork off of VS Code.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yes. And so everything you know and love about Bob, and if you have, like, I have a pet extension called trailing spaces, which seems silly, but YAML doesn't like trailing spaces. That same extension that I used in VS Code, I can hook into IBM Bob. I can just go out and look for it and put it in there. It also does command line. And Bob actually has a command line interface that you can download also. So
Sure.
yeah, okay. I could just wax on. Can you tell that I have a really bad crush on Bob?
Well, that's great. Makes you the perfect person to talk about it. My other kind of question for you is a little bit of a niche question. Is we do a lot of work with infrastructure as code and automation and those kinds of things. That's a space that has really seen a lot of interest in AI generated code assistance, because oftentimes the folks who are doing automation and the folks who are doing those kinds of infrastructure as code maybe aren't the deepest programmers in the world. So getting a little bit of an assist from an AI assisted coding tool really makes a difference. Where have you seen advantages, or what would you say is sort of challenges around using AI generated code in an infrastructure as code space? Are they different, same kind of things, or are there some uniquenesses that people should think about?
I think there's some actually really unique benefits. If you are in a situation where you are trying to create a platform or enable people like network engineers to do more automation for themselves because they know networking. Having them have the ability to write their own code, and they know what should happen. And even if they may not be able to read the code, they can run the code and they know what the results should be on the devices that they're managing.
Mhm.
And so they have the ability to actually validate whether or not it's working properly. They might not know if it's exactly efficient, but I think it's lowering the bar of adoption for people to develop who haven't traditionally been developers, making it much easier for companies to deploy automations. Now, having said that, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Well, and that's where things like security guardrails and code quality guardrails and some of the things that are introduced in Bob become so important, because like you said, that engineer knows what they want to have happen. They know whether it happened properly or not, but then being able to make sure that the code that they wrote actually followed some sort of standards and have the appropriate security parameters is something that we need the tool to be able to help us enforce.
Yep. Bob does that beautifully. You actually are able to write a security directive into your repo. And if, for example, your security team has security standards and they're documented, you can point to that internally and require, in other words, in plain language, you write, you must review all code to match these security standards and have it reference the document. You can do the same thing with code standards. So you don't even have to replicate it over and over and over. You can just point to an existing link that exists within your organization and have it apply that. The other thing that you can do is you have the ability to not only have it apply that, but you can actually tell it to document in your code where you're off. You don't necessarily have to accept the changes. You can document where you don't match. If for some reason there's a valid reason that you don't,
Sure.
you can still document that you know you're out of compliance, and then you can put into your code why you choose not to be compliant.
Well, and I think that's the other thing that is such a huge acceleration. You talked before about 60 hours down to 4. That presumes that you wrote that 60 hours. You may not have documented it that well. You just wrote it in 60 hours. Now in 4 hours, I get not only the code, but I also get well documented, explained code that I can go do, that I can maintain more easily, that I can have a third party review. So you can start to develop a process where I've got somebody who's the network engineer writing the code and have somebody on the animation team who's used to seeing Java or Python or whatever the language you're using for the automation, Ansible, be able to look at that and be able to do some sort of internal review. And that peer review becomes different, but probably even more important than it ever has been before. So
You're absolutely right. And I think more efficient because you've got people who are the experts in their domain applying their domain expertise. And what I really like about this is then you start to get that cross-team collaboration, which I think is fantastic.
absolutely. So I'm going to wrap up on not exactly a negative note, but there's a couple things that as you've used Bob, you've come across that we've incorporated into the way that we help our clients adopt the platform, sort of call them gotchas, call them considerations, whatever you want. Can you maybe just share a couple of those things that you've run across that you need to think about as you're implementing Bob, that we work with clients? I know one of the things we talked about was how deep in folders is your repository that you point Bob at, for example. So.
This is a great gotcha. And I learned this, unfortunately, the hard way. So what I'll describe to you all is I generally have a code folder. It's literally called code on my local machine. And then I clone all of my repos into that. So each repo has its own folder. Claude, so this is both a good thing and a bad thing, or not Claude. Boy, I keep saying Claude. Bob is so context aware. My normal way of developing is I open that code folder and then I pick whichever repo I'm going to be working on, and that's what I work on. This is a big gotcha. If you do that with Bob is going to assume that everything in the folder you have open, it should be used for context for whatever you're working on.
Yeah.
What I discovered was I very quickly burned through several thousand code tokens because when using Bob, you need to narrow that context window. So I have to open, if I'm using generative AI to write code, I need to open only the thing that I want to work on and nothing else. Because that's the other challenge that you have is not only does it burn tokens when you do that, it also tries to create relationships between your folders, and they may not be related at all. And so you can get some really janky code. And that was the other discovery I had was I was like, why is it doing that? That is so strange. And then I was like, oh, it's reading this other folder that has nothing to do. And I was like, oh, okay, I gotta, I saved everything, had to close it and reopened the single folder that I was trying to work on.
Sure. No, and I think that's super important as you adopt any of these tools. All of this technology, including Bob, is so new that there are things that are going to happen with different solutions, different models, different ways of using models that that make you have to think differently about how you go about using the tool so that you get the best value out of it. Just had somebody pop in the chat and ask for a screenshot. Maybe you could just pop the IDE up for Bob quick and let people see if you're able to do that.
I'd love to.
We'll wrap up with that.
I would love to. Let me share. I'm going to go like this. Okay, I'm not going to do that. I would be happy to. Let's go like this. So I apologize. I'm going to minimize everybody for a second. So this is IBM Bob's IDE. Looks an awful lot like VS Code, if you're familiar with it. And do we have time for maybe a 5-minute quick show and tell or a quick demo?
Sounds great.
Okay. So I pre-prepared this, and this is a demo that I've done for some other folks. Sorry, Bob's deciding that it's going to open some things for me. So as you can see, I've narrowed down to one folder, the coffee talk. I pre-prepared this prompt. Oh, this is something I should talk about. Bob does something incredibly well. If you write a spec, and lay out each of your architectural layers and what languages and things you want to use. And you can even lay out, if you really want to get complex, you can lay out like screen sizes and areas. It will actually use that in order to write the code. This is very simple. I joked about a sales research demo, and I did this for our sales team not too long ago. So I pre-prepared the prompt, and all it says is, give me a sales research agent, and I want a nice UI. Here's what I want it to do for inputs. And when I click a button that processes the data, I want you to give me this information. And so very plain language. And so I don't know if anybody's got a timer running. Oh, this is, I want to talk about auto approve disabled. I'm going to go ahead and turn this on, but you can pick each of these individual pieces. We don't have time to talk about what they all are, but typically this is really unwise to do. And yeah, hold on, let me fix. So Bob has, hang tight. I thought I checked this morning and I had access, but it looks like I may have lost access. There we go. Let's try this again. So I copy pasted this into the prompt, and then you can see we have a conversation over on the right side, my right side of my screen, with Bob. And it's asking me to approve. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to approve everything. I want to approve everything because I want this to run really quickly. Again, not best practice at all. And typically in a prompt, I would include where I want to get my credentials and specifically have agent specific credentials, not my personal credentials. If you all haven't heard, and Michael, I don't know if we've talked about this, one of the challenges that we've really got with agents right now is people are developing agents and they're using their credentials and they're not giving the agent an identity of its own. And so when they deploy it, it's actually carrying that user's credentials, and then you actually lose the ability to understand whether or not the person actually did the action or the agent did, because now you've got credentials being essentially used by two things or two people with identity.
So look for an upcoming coffee talk from us around non-human identity. It's a piece of what we're working on with folks. So.
Yep. And as you can see, it's writing, look at this, it's writing all these files. I'm currently letting it save, and this takes 4 or 5 minutes. So now it says it's all done, and it's going to tell me where it's at. But it's saying you need to run this command line. So I'm just going to go new terminal. I could have asked it to go ahead and auto start. Come on. Maybe I might not have. Oh, Michael, I apologize. And folks, I apologize. I got a brand new laptop, which I'm really excited about, but I forgot to put I don't have it all set up. I got it like 3 or 4 days ago.
Well,
but
I think we answered the request of showing the IDE, so people got a chance to at least see what's there. And would be one of the things that we really are offering and be very happy to do for anybody who's on the call or anybody in any of your organizations is do a demo. There's a lot of stuff there. There's a big advantage to actually getting your hands on and trying it. So we can demo it for you, but letting you try a use case or so is even better chance to sort of go, aha, this is really what this is doing, and it's amazing. I got a couple questions in the chat. I think one of them we can answer actually, I think you can answer both these fairly quickly. Is Bob available to the general public, or is it only for enterprises? And I believe there's a pay-go version of this.
Yep, well. There is several different versions. You can get they're very transparent about pricing. Yep. And so it's $20 a month for the basic, if you're just using it personally. And It comes with 40 Bob coins, which is about 200,000 code tokens. That's about 2 days worth of tokens if you're a full-time developer, like 8 hours a day, constant and really hammering. Just to give you context, they're not very expensive, the Bob tokens, and you can buy more. There is an enterprise version and several in between that come with, again, increasing number of tokens and things like that. Bob actually uses several LLMs. It has, one of the things that makes it really efficient is it does use Granite, Claude. There's two others that I can't think of off the top of my head. And the way that it uses the tokens is highly efficient. It, based on the complexity of what you're asking and what it's doing for any given task, it will pick the least cost model, which is really great. And I've actually seen in my, it has in the GUI, the ability to see how many tokens you're using. And I've actually seen my tokens go down and then go back up because it will adjust and do real-time token spend. And if it finds a way to do it more efficiently, it'll credit some of your code tokens back. Okay. And is there a version that runs on Linux? You can download on Mac OS and you can download for Windows. I am not 100% sure about Linux, but my expectation would be I'm going to recommend go out there and take a look, and I will have to post that maybe in a blog. Yeah,
I would be shocked if there is not a Linux version out there, given IBM's investment in Linux and their ownership of Red Hat.
Thank you, George.
We'll do that for sure. So
it is multimodal, but there's more than Mistral too, and Granite and Claude. There's another fourth one that they've added in, but it is in. I want to be very clear. Bob cannot easily be configured if you want to use a frontier model. You can figure out how to do it using an MCP server, but it is not out of the box. It doesn't have a place where you can go, I want you to use this frontier model. Well, and that's by design.
Yeah, I was going to say it's designed for efficiency, it's designed for token optimization, but it's also designed to take advantage of the Granite model that's been trained very specifically on a set of skills, which are coding skills, right? So it's there's definitely some capabilities that are designed to increase efficiency versus sort of pushing you to that frontier model right at the edge.
It does. And Randy, it is awesome. I have a horrible crush on Bob.
All right. Well, I'm going to wrap us up.
I'll probably not go that far, but willing to take him out on a date.
All right. Sounds awesome.
Be very happy to talk to you about that. So absolutely. I would absolutely ask everybody on the call to feel free to reach out to anybody on the call. I think we've got info@evolvingsol.com. If you don't have individual contact information, you can certainly reach out either directly to Rael or me on LinkedIn or through Evolving Solutions email. If you've got an account executive who works with you, they'll be very happy to help connect you with us. And my offer's out there. I think I probably owe Randy a pound of coffee. So we'll set up. I'll be happy to do demos and set up meetings for you. Thank you again so much. We're sending out, Kelly, help me make sure I'm doing this right. We're sending out Starbucks gift cards and Evolving Solutions Yeti mugs to those who attended today.
That is correct.
All right. And thank you again for spending your time with us. Really appreciate it. Look forward to your questions and to interacting with everyone soon.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Kelly. Bye, all.